Welcome to a place where real love doesn't just whisper, it touches, it heals, and it stays. These are not fairy tales. These are the quiet, aching, soul, deep moments we never forget. Moments where a stranger's gaze feels like home. Where slow hands unravel years of silence. Where every kiss carries weight, and every touch speaks louder than words. Here, love isn't loud. It's patient. It doesn't rush, it waits. It doesn't take, it gives. Whether it's a midnight conversation that unlocks a guarded heart or a gentle embrace that makes the world disappear, you'll find those truths here. So if your soul is hungry for a love that goes beyond the surface, love that sees you, holds you, and stays with you long after the moment ends, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now and let these stories remind you that sometimes the deepest love begins with a stranger. He wasn't supposed to be there, neither was I. That night was never meant to happen the way it did. I'd nearly canceled everything. The world outside felt heavy, the kind of weight that makes your soul feel tired before your feet ever touch the floor. I remember standing at the window, watching the rain smear the glass, thinking how easy it would be to stay in. Wrap myself in silence, let the hours pass untouched, unseen, but something quiet inside whispered, "Go." So I did. I didn't dress up. I didn't expect anything. I wasn't searching, hoping, or needing. I just showed up. In the middle of a place filled with noise, with lights, with movement and laughter that didn't quite reach my chest. And that's where he was, alone, still, as if he were carved out of the moment itself. He didn't smile at first. He just looked, and not in the way most men do. His eyes didn't scan, didn't assume, didn't claim. They studied, softly, curiously, as if I were a story worth reading from the beginning. A question he wasn't rushing to answer. He didn't move toward me, just sat there, letting the space between us speak. I didn't feel watched. I felt seen. Something in me stilled, like a thread inside had stopped fraying. Not because he said anything, not because of charm or words, but because for the first time in what felt like forever, someone didn't look through me. He didn't glance and move on. His presence didn't ask for attention. It offered it. We didn't speak at first, just two strangers in the same moment, surrounded by strangers chasing whatever it is people chase. But every time my eyes wandered, they found his again, and every time, something unspoken passed between us. Not flirtation, not spark, something quieter, heavier, familiar in a way that made no sense. Eventually, a seat opened up beside him. I didn't think, I just moved, and when our shoulders brushed, something inside fluttered. Not nerves, not attraction, recognition. He turned to me and asked the most unexpected thing, "Are you tired of pretending too?" I hadn't said a word. I hadn't let anything show, and yet, he knew. I nodded. We didn't need small talk, didn't need the safe surface, level things people use to fill the gaps. Somehow, in a world where connection feels more like performance, this didn't. This felt like silence making room for truth. He listened like it was an art, not just to what I said, but to what I didn't. His questions didn't probe, they invited, and when I hesitated, he didn't fill the pause. He waited, without pressure, without impatience. As if my thoughts, even the messy, tangled ones, were worth hearing in their own time. He told me about his past, not the polished version, the real one, loss, loneliness, a moment where he almost gave up. And how one day, in the quiet of an ordinary afternoon, he realized he didn't want to survive his life. He wanted to feel it again. I didn't even notice how close we had become. His hand rested on the table, inches from mine. Not reaching, not begging, just open, like a door slightly ajar, a welcome if I wanted it. I did. When my fingers grazed his, he didn't tighten his grip. He just let them rest together, like two separate songs finally falling into harmony. I remember breathing differently in that moment, as if my lungs had finally been given permission to expand fully, as if the air didn't hurt to inhale anymore. We stayed like that for hours, people came and went. The noise faded. The world shrank until it was just the space between his gaze and mine. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't guarded. And for the first time in years, I wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to be impressive. He didn't boast. He didn't dress it up. He was real, raw, simple, and it was enough, more than enough. When it was time to leave, neither of us asked the obvious questions. What now? Where next? Will I see you again? Because somehow, it already felt like we belonged to something unspoken, something that didn't need definition to be real. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and possibility. And as we stood under the streetlight, not quite touching, he looked at me with that same steady gaze from earlier, the one that saw too much and still didn't flinch. You're safe, he said, not as a promise, as a fact, and something inside me let go, not just of fear, not just of walls, but of all the versions of love that came before him, the ones that took more than they gave, the ones that left fingerprints without staying long enough to hold on. This was different. This was slow. This was steady. This was the beginning of something that didn't ask to be rushed. That night, I didn't fall. I didn't tumble into romance with recklessness or fantasy. I simply stepped forward, into something solid, something warm, something that felt like truth. And even now, when I think of how everything began, I don't remember fireworks or grand gestures. I remember quiet. I remember his eyes. I remember the silence that first told me I was no longer alone. He was just a stranger until he became my everything. It didn't happen fast. There were no grand confessions, no overwhelming rush of emotion that swept everything away. It began in the smallest of moments, his silence beside me when I didn't want to talk, the way his eyes never demanded but always waited. He didn't fill the space with words. He didn't reach for explanations. He just stayed. I didn't make it easy. I had spent too long learning how to keep everything behind a smile, how to fold pain into polite responses and make emptiness look elegant. Most people never noticed. Most people never stayed long enough to, but he did. He didn't try to save me. He didn't offer solutions or try to fix what even I couldn't name. He just kept showing up with soft hands, with warm glances, with an energy that didn't crowd, didn't press, just stayed, and in that staying, something in me, something I thought I had locked away for good, started to shift. It wasn't a sudden undoing, it was slow, gentle, like spring warming frozen ground. There were days I pulled back, days I couldn't meet his gaze because I didn't want him to see how fragile I really was. He never pushed. He never asked for more than I could give. He simply offered presence, like an open chair beside a fire, a place to come back to when I was ready. There were nights when words tangled in my throat, when the weight inside was too heavy to name. He'd reach for my hand then, not to pull me closer, but to let me know I didn't have to walk through it alone, that even silence could be shared, and something in that unspoken safety softened me. One night I let him trace his fingers across the small scar on my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. I let him feel what most people ignored, and he didn't ask where it came from. He didn't need to know the story to understand it mattered. His touch wasn't curious. It was reverent. Like he knew it wasn't the mark that hurt, but the memory that lived beneath it. That night, for the first time, I let my head fall against his chest. I could feel his heart beating steady and slow, like it was waiting for me to match its rhythm. His arms didn't tighten. They just wrapped around me the way the sky holds the earth completely without question. And in that stillness, something happened, something small but real. I breathed, not the shallow, guarded kind. A deep one that felt like life returning to places I had forgotten how to feel. The ache inside didn't disappear, but next to him, it stopped feeling like something I had to carry alone. He didn't pretend I wasn't wounded. He just made space for the truth of it, and in that space, healing didn't feel like pressure. It felt like permission. There was a night, sometime later, when I began to speak, not all at once, not in a flood, Just pieces, little things, a memory that used to burn, a name I hadn't said in years, a fear I hated admitting. I watched his face as I spoke. He never looked away, never winced. He listened like every word mattered, even the broken ones. He would brush his thumb over the back of my hand while I talked, just that, nothing more, but it anchored me in a way I didn't know I needed. He wasn't afraid of my past. He didn't flinch from my pain. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a burden for feeling too much. One morning, I woke with my head against his chest, the early light painting the room gold. He was already awake, but didn't move, didn't speak. Just let me stay there, listening to the quiet strength in his breathing. I traced a line across his ribs and whispered, "I don't know how you do it." He smiled, sleepy and soft, and said, "You don't have to understand it. You just have to feel it." And I did. Every moment with him taught me that love doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. Real love waits, it watches, it sees, and when it touches, it doesn't take, it gives, slowly, patiently, gently, in the presence of someone who never tried to fix what was broken. Something broken began to feel whole again. And I began to feel it wasn't about lust. There was nothing rushed in the way he reached for me, no hunger that devoured, no urgency that demanded. It was slower than that, softer, like he wanted to learn me, not own me. Every gesture felt deliberate, like he understood that the body holds stories long before the mouth ever dares to speak them. The first time his hand rested against my lower back, it didn't send sparks. It sent stillness, a calmness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't because of where he touched me, but how? As if I were something fragile, not from weakness, but from worth. Something valuable, something he didn't want to break. We were close, close enough that I could feel the rise and fall of his breath before his lips even brushed mine. He didn't press, he waited, letting the silence fill in everything we weren't ready to say out loud. And when he kissed me, it wasn't to take something. It was to offer something. It felt like a question, not a claim, and the answer wasn't just in how I kissed him back, but in how I let myself be held. In the way I leaned into the moment without needing to be anything other than what I already was. With him, there was no performing. There was no trying to be the right kind of beautiful, the right kind of wanted. I didn't have to disappear to feel desired. I could stay fully present and still be chosen. The first time he undressed me, it didn't feel like I was being exposed. It felt like I was being seen. He didn't rush to pull fabric away. He lingered. His fingers traced lines I'd long forgotten. His eyes followed the map of my skin with reverence, not curiosity. And when his hands moved, they moved with purpose, not possession, like he wasn't just touching skin. He was memorizing the weight of my existence. Every part of me responded in ways I didn't know were still possible, not because he lit something wild, but because he awakened something quiet, a longing not just to be touched, but to be understood. There were places on my body I had ignored, places I had learned to hide, the curve of a scar, the softness of a stomach I used to scorn, but he didn't skip over them. He kissed them slowly, as if there was no difference between the beautiful and the broken. As if every inch of me deserved tenderness. I remember the way his mouth felt against my collarbone, how it didn't just graze but stayed, how it lingered like he was listening to the pulse underneath, like he was anchoring himself to the rhythm of me. And in those moments, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel used. I felt sacred, because what we shared wasn't about bodies colliding. It was about souls remembering. There was no shame, no fear, only surrender, not the kind that weakens, but the kind that frees. He never asked for more than I was ready to give, and yet somehow I gave him everything without resistance. Because he didn't demand, he invited, and I accepted fully. There was a night I cried in his arms without warning, not from sadness, from the overwhelming flood of being met, of feeling held in a way that made every defense fall apart. He didn't speak, he just held me tighter, not to silence the tears, but to let me know they were welcome. His touch told stories, not of conquest, but of care. And when we lay tangled in each other, long after the world had gone quiet, he'd press his forehead to mine like a silent promise. Like he was telling me he wasn't going anywhere, that he saw me, the full, complicated, scarred, beautiful truth of me, and he was staying. There's a difference between being wanted and being cherished. He knew that difference. He showed it with every kiss that said, "You're safe," with every hand that rested, not because it wanted more, but because it already had enough. We didn't need to speak when the lights were low. Our bodies told the truth better than our words ever could. His fingertips found the spaces where tension lived, and without force, he melted them. The parts of me that had gone numb slowly came back to life, not just in flesh, but in spirit, and for the first time in so long, I let go, not out of exhaustion, out of trust, because with him, surrender wasn't the end of power. It was the beginning of healing. And in those nights, wrapped in his warmth, something deep inside me finally exhaled. He never asked to be everything. He didn't arrive with flowers or fireworks or a promise wrapped in perfect timing. He didn't sweep in like a storm or shake the world the way I once imagined love would. He came quietly, like a whisper through a crowded room, barely noticed at first, but impossible to forget once it's heard. The beginning was simple, a conversation that didn't try too hard, a smile that didn't ask for anything, a warmth that didn't burn, but stayed. He never asked me to open up. He just made it feel safe to. There was something in the way he existed beside me that made the rest of the world seem less loud. He didn't fill silences with words. He honored them, let them breathe. And slowly, I found myself leaning into those still moments, those gentle pauses between his sentences where the most honest parts of me started to come alive. I didn't know how quickly the ordinary could turn sacred, how morning coffee could feel like worship, how sitting across from someone in soft silence could feel like being understood better than 1,000 conversations ever could. One night, I couldn't sleep. The world felt heavy in my chest again. I didn't say anything, but somehow he knew. He rolled over, pulled me into his arms without a word, and just held me there. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't try to fix it. He simply became a place I could rest, a place I could fall apart without falling alone. He had this quiet gift, turning the smallest things into something unforgettable, the brush of his fingers over mine while we waited for a light to change, the way his eyes softened when I laughed, like he was watching something rare, the way he remembered how I took my tea even when I forgot. It was never about what he said. It was always about how he made everything feel lighter, simply by being there. I used to believe that love needed to be grand to be real, that it had to fight its way in with fireworks and fierce declarations, but he changed that. He taught me that love can arrive gently. It can unfold like a secret kept safe. It can feel like breathing for the first time after holding your breath for far too long. He never needed to be the center of attention. He didn't try to impress me. He never once told me who he was. He just let me see it in the way he showed up. It was the hand on my lower back when a room felt too loud, the way he sat with me on hard days, not needing to talk, just offering the quiet kind of comfort that makes pain feel less permanent, the way he held my gaze when I didn't feel beautiful and somehow made me believe I was. We built something slow, something steady. Without realizing it, the days began to shape themselves around his presence. My favorite songs started to sound like his voice. My mornings started to miss his breath against my shoulder. My loneliness stopped screaming because he made even silence feel like company. I didn't know I had been waiting for someone to come this gently. There was a night we danced in the kitchen, barefoot and tired. The music was low, and the dishes were still piled in the sink, but he wrapped his arms around me, kissed my forehead, and everything stopped mattering. except the way he held me like I was the only thing he wanted to hold for the rest of his life. He never said those words, but his actions said them every single day, and that's what made him different, because love, the real kind, doesn't always announce itself with grand entrances. Sometimes it shows up quietly, with soft eyes and steady hands. Sometimes it walks in as a stranger and without asking becomes home. He arrived with no expectations, no need to fix me, no desire to shape me into anything other than who I already was. He simply chose to stay, to love me in the gentle places, to show up when it wasn't convenient, to hold me in the dark and laugh with me in the light. And now, every part of life echoes with the softness of that love, in the way I reach for his side of the bed before I even open my eyes, in the way I look for his smile in a crowded room, in the way I can still feel his breath on the back of my neck in the quiet hours before dawn. He was just a stranger until he became my everything. If this story reached a part of you that's been waiting quietly, don't let it go unnoticed. These aren't just stories. They're mirrors, reminders, proof that love, real soul, deep love, is still out there. So if your heart felt anything tonight, like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes all it takes is one story to awaken everything we've buried, and the next one might just be yours.